So it's 2:05. Shall we get started?
Sure.
Yeah,
Okay, great.
it's great.
So-
Thanks for having us, Zach.
I'll do a little formal introduction. I'm Zachary Tomlinson. My pronouns are he, him. I am the artistic director of the Center at West Park, nonprofit community performing arts center based on the Upper West Side. And this is the first of our artist conversation series that we are starting with our resident artists this fall. And this is part of our virtual performance residency, which we have created to adjust to the needs of doing performance in a socially distant world. And I'm here today with Johnny Meyer, Karen Alvarado, and Ania Upstill, the creators of Ghost Hunt, the Halls-Mills Double Homicide. And I'm so excited to be with you all today and to talk about your work and this project and how folks can experience it. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Zach.
Thanks.
Here.
So I thought I'd just start by talking about the conditions we're all experiencing right now, because they're so much a part of our lives and they're also a part of how we make work. And as artists, how we respond to the world around us is a big part of what motivates us and how we hope to engage people. So how have the last 6 months been for you all? How what have you struggled with? What has kept you going? How have you grown, perhaps? How have you discovered new ways of working? How has it been?
Well, I think that most theater artists, the pandemic created a pretty severe disruption, not just because of the requirement to close down, but also because many of our audience members are the most vulnerable people. People with health complications or senior citizens. And so we had an obligation to stop in-person work in order to preserve their safety, help them out. In Middlesex County, where Karen and I happen to be right now, they lost 1,400 people just through March and April. So it's been the crisis has been real up here, and making those adjustments was both obvious and necessary. And the two things that changed for us, shifted really, were we were going to bring to Center at West Park our play Thou Shalt Not, which is an interpretation of the Halls-Mills Double Homicide that we'd worked on last year, and now we were really excited to bring it back into the community with which we created it, and then also to the new community in New York. And then we were also going to we were working with Butch Mermaid, again, Ania Upstill, and their show Transhumance, we were going to take to Edinburgh. It's an excellent one-person show that explores the ways in which gender is a journey, and really remarkable piece of physical theater. And so both of those things were pretty big blows, I think.
Yeah, I think I went through a period of denial, like, okay, well, the show's scheduled for May, we have to cancel that one, but surely by September, things will be, at least somewhat figured out, even if we have to do some sort of social distance performance. And then it became really clear that that's not safe and it's just not smart. And so once I accepted that fact, which was probably around like June, I had to do a hard pivot in my artistry, and what it forced me to do is to upskill, right? So I'm an actor and a director and a producer, but very quickly I had to also become an audio engineer and a copy editor and things of that nature in order to produce some of the work that we wanted to do by transitioning into podcasting. And this brand new project, which has lots of different mediums involved. So it was actually, it ended up being a really good skill building time of my life, to where immediately I was forced to get out of my comfort zone and And I think as soon as I embraced this as the new normal, things got a lot easier and creativity flowed, and it felt very, very relevant and important.
Now, I want to say, to pass it to Ania, that Ania, after the cancellation of Transhumance, or maybe even just before it, developed Proud Voices. So maybe you can talk about that too, Ania.
Sure. I mean, I think very similarly to Karen, I initially was sort of, I guess, hopeful that maybe it wouldn't be quite as long as it's proven to be. I also, I mean, pretty much, I had the unique experience of being in New Zealand during their lockdown and then coming back to the States. So I guess I got to watch it from overseas. But similar to many people, I lost all my work and then kind of was like, okay, well, where do we go from here? So I moved pretty quickly from let's do a Zoom staged reading with a friend of mine to, wow, there's a lot of Zoom staged readings and I think we can do better. Not maybe better, but it provides something closer to what I think of as theater. And so I guess the project that Johnny's referencing, Proud Voices, came more out of that instinct, which was to create something that could be experienced in an actual place in more of a real way time-wise. So it was an audio trail through the West Village for Pride. And the audio that was in the trail were audio clips from New York LGBTQ artists of color. So it was a way to promote artists, and we paid all the artists, and to promote people getting out and supporting small businesses despite COVID, because you could do it, 6 feet apart with a mask, all of that. So it's been a really interesting time. I think it's a bit of a moment of going between like despair and excitement, because it's like, wow, we're not making theater, nor will we for a long time, but exciting, we get to make audio work. But despair because theater's gone forever. But exciting because sometimes clowning works on Zoom. I think that's been my general it's constant peaks and troughs. But also I have started a master's program at CUNY in applied theater that I would not have enrolled in if I hadn't had this time. So that's great. That's a peak, not a trough, just to clarify.
Where is it, up here or?
Yes.
Well, that's great, and I love the CUNY pride. So I wanted to ask you also about your life and work before the pandemic. As theater artists, what has inspired you? What inspired you to become a theater artist, and what is the work that you've been moved to make and to explore in more recent years?
Wow, that's a big one.
I'll go first.
Yeah.
Because 2 words came to mind. I think the things that are consistent in what has drawn me to theater and the work that I've made, looking back, not being aware of it at the time, are connection and representation. So connection to an audience, connection between people, the idea of like a communal event. And especially I spent a lot of time doing Shakespeare, but specifically doing like early modern convention Shakespeare. So talking to the audience, working more collaboratively. And I think then as a queer person, I started thinking a lot about representation. So a lot of my work has also been about queer representation and even representation of people who aren't necessarily seen. And I think what compels me is the ability of theater to draw people into conversations that they might not otherwise have and give them insight into situations they might not otherwise think about, which is like broad strokes, hopefully positive social change. Donnie and Karen.
Thanks, Ania. Thanks for going first. It gave me time to think, and I'm still Gosh, there's a lot that compels me to do theater, but I think at this point in my life, it's human complexity and how layered we are in terms of, what meets the eye may not be what is actually motivating us to do our actions. So I feel like, potent human stories, origin stories really compels me, digging in deep into characters, into circumstances, finding out why we are the way we are, what circumstances led us to this point. So yeah, I kind of like, I think origin stories is kind of the thing that I really perk up for nowadays. So, with the Halls-Mills, it was fascinating because there's so many characters and so many events, but when you really zoom into one character and start digging and digging and digging and figuring out their heritage and their ancestors' heritage and all of the inherited biases that made them who they are and act the way they did, it's fascinating work, and it's really fun as an artist to embody that and to help other artists figure those things out too. And it's like a treasure hunt within a person's mind.
And I think you also, identity kind of was at the root of a lot of your early work, because you started out as a kid and you were doing this kind of border hopping in Texas and Mexico to do history plays.
Yeah.
So,
That's definitely where my origin came from, was through my heritage. I did do touring historical Hispanic plays about Mexican identity, Mexican American identity, specifically Tejano identity, and we did tour around southern Texas and northern Mexico, border cities and whatnot, and that's always been something I've really embraced in my artistry. And it's been interesting as an artist to transition from being a Texas artist to being an artist in the New York area, where being Latinx has a totally different look and feel. And it's been honestly very difficult for me to feel accepted as a Latinx person in the Northeast, because I don't look, sound, seem like some of the preconceptions up here. So that's something I've been trying to actively unpack and bring my own culture to the Northeast, to show that there is more than one way to be Latinx.
So I think I came to theater probably later than Ania and Karen. There's a program at the University of Texas at Austin, run by a professor, James Lowland. It's called Shakespeare at Wyandotte, and you do Shakespeare plays it's an English class, but you do three Shakespeare plays in repertoire with each other. And that's where I met Ania. They were a part of that program. Oh, you were in Wyandotte today?
I'm wearing a Wyandotte shirt. I just feel like that's relevant. Sorry.
It is relevant because it's got kind of like it does have a feel where
it's a cult.
It's
not really a cult.
It's a happy cult, and it's where you go in and you learn a lot very quickly because it's such an intense experience. I remember at the time it felt comparable to when I was in the Army, because it's 24/7. You're really immersed in it. You're doing everything backwards and forwards, and you have to be very dependent upon the other people that you're working with.
It's like conservatory training, but even more so, because you have to make your own costumes and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, if the focus is definitely, the priority is definitely the language, right? But then there's all these other elements that you work on to get there. And I think that in some ways it's a little bit gentler than conservatory, in the sense that conservatory really wants you to hone art making. And I think that at Wyandotte, where it's focused very much on a sort of learning to work together in a collaborative effort for learning. So there is that element to it that makes it a little bit different at times. But in any way, while I was there, I'd been working on a novel manuscript about Afghanistan, which is one of the places I served. And I had a few experiences on stage that were really impactful for me, so I reworked them. And then Ania and the rest of the gang that I was there with, we just kept working on it, and then we debuted it that winter, and that was my first play. And so I'm really interested in the dynamics of being able to show things that people tend to either conceal or lie about, and being able to expose those on stage and people witness them. So there's things that there's judgments we make, and there's these activities that go on out there in the public realm, but that are not shown. And I think that theater provides a unique way of both experiencing that, and instead of just coming up with a consensus, if the audience members can see each other, you actually come up with a lot of points of difference. I like the conflict that comes out when you perform in like a 3/4 stage and you realize that one audience member is laughing at something you don't find funny and somebody else is crying. I think that's really important for a democracy. And getting used to that conflict is just, that's there. And whereas now we're in these consensus tunnels, right? Like social media and the newspapers you follow, you can very much get into an echo chamber. And I think theater provides an opportunity to break that down, which is what, kind of what we're after in projects like this.
I really like the term consensus tunnel, Johnny. I'm going to start using that. That's genius. It's true, but it's also just like, we're in a tunnel.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you can't turn around safely, and you just have to people just keep going once they're in it. Mm-hmm. They even think of it as like the light at the end of the tunnel. If I just believe this hard enough, it'll be okay. And we all do that to some extent. And
totally.
And if we don't break that, then you can get into really, really big trouble, which we're seeing.
We're experiencing that trouble right now.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah. I mean, you have people that are trained the same way I was that are showing up in public spaces now, in democratically elected spaces, with semi-automatic weapons and rifles, and they're using those in order to coerce people that are democratically elected. We saw that happen in Michigan. We saw elements of it in Wisconsin and Texas and other places. And then we see also that, some groups are allowed to peaceably assemble and some are not. And it helps if you're a white guy with a gun, right? Mm. So, but these are people that are living in a tunnel, and then they come out into these public realms thinking that they're doing some kind of virtuous civic behavior. And they're not, right? It's an all-white male group threatening people who aren't like them. That's what it is. And you only get that if you're not, to break that, you have to have a group that looks more like the group that we work with on this play.
Absolutely.
Good segue, Johnny.
Yeah, very good segue. So let's talk about this play. And why don't you tell me how you first encountered this story and what excited you about it? What made you think, oh, this needs to be a play?
Well, the story came to us. So we're from Texas. We came to New Brunswick, New Jersey for my grad school. I went to Rutgers Mason Gross Conservatory to get an MFA in acting. And we had been up here about 3 years. And I was pregnant and I had a baby my senior year of grad school. It was insane, but it was lovely at the same time. But I had a very short amount of time, and my parents are from Texas. They came up for the birth, and they had to go back to Texas. So we only had like a week to figure out a baptism for our new baby boy. And so Johnny's calling around trying to figure out which church we can go to. I was raised Catholic. No Catholic churches would accept us. But there was an Episcopal church that ended up being right across the street from where we live called St. John the Evangelist. And they said, yeah, we can do your baptism. And so we showed up to this church we had never been to, but we had passed by a million times. And it was a very small congregation. And they were all so sweet and so wonderful. And they had a cake for us. And they invited us to stay and have coffee out. They were just super embracing. And they found out that we were artists. And they were like, oh, well, what kind of play? Like musicals? And we're like, no, we don't, not really, even though now we have. But, and they were like, well, you can do a play here. I'm like, what do you mean, like here? And they're like, yeah, here. And it was a beautiful old assembly hall built in 1861, vaulted ceilings, just absolutely gorgeous. And I was like, okay, well, what are your rates? And they were like, rates? Just do a play. And we're like, awesome. So we immediately found a space to create work and to do shows if we wanted. And now we use it as our regular place to generate our work. And we do perform out of there as well. So very shortly after we made this theater alliance at St. John's, we found out it was, dun dun dun, the murder church. Johnny had found that out a little bit before he told me. I found out later.
Yeah, it was not something that really clicked, but the godparents from Mateo, David Burns and Valerie Laporte, they had both mentioned this story in passing. It's kind of New Jersey lore that it happened, and then they were kind of we like I said, this was arranged rather quickly. And then they kind of did a double take when we told them what church, because they'd never been inside it, and they had not heard nice things about the congregation. And so we did this, and it turned out that, like we said, the congregation were very nice people, and they acknowledged, like the congregation acknowledged, that yes, they were known for, like they were tied to this double homicide. And then they talked about, now this was the key, these were all, the vestry was majority women, and they talked, that now it is, and they talked about how they had never been allowed to talk about the murders, and this had changed their reputation within the wider community, and that this had shaped it. And now they suggested that we tackle it and we look at it, and I don't think that's an accident, because it's a story of at its heart is there were two victims, one was male and one was a woman, and it was a large part of it was the disproportionate and horrific violence against the woman, and there was a sense of judgment on that, and judgment about her behavior in particular that was going around with this, and the notion, the sort of bits of scandal and things like that. So they went 180 from not being able to talk about it to wanting a play about it, something like to show and explain how this happened.
And I think at first we were a little worried about, well, do we have to censor ourselves? Do we have to censor, how complicit the church members in the 1920s were? And they were like, no, this is not a good thing to have in your history, and we need to, y'all do whatever perspective you take on it. That's fine, So it was great to have that just 100% green light to not have to censor our perspective and our exploration, and so that's how Thou Shalt Not came about. It was an exploration of these murders, and really it was more so broadly. It's Reverend Edward Hall was the rector of St. John's, and one of the choir singers was Eleanor Mills. They were both married to other people. They were having an affair, and pretty much everyone in the congregation knew about it. And then one day they end up dead underneath a crabapple tree on a known lover's lane. And he was shot once in the head, and she was shot 3 times in the face. Her throat was slit, her tongue and her vocal cords were removed. And they were their bodies were laid out in a specific way, facing the tree, and their torn love letters were strewn about their bodies. So as you can imagine, it was a huge media circus around not only the discovery of the bodies and the tryst, but also the subsequent trials that came about, because he was married to one of the richest and most influential women in town. And
who was also the primary suspect.
He was also the primary suspect, who Ania played, actually.
But yes.
So, Anya, can you tell us a little bit about exploring that character?
Yeah, my favorite part about exploring the character is I live like a 10-minute walk from where she's buried. Fun fact, her and her family are buried in Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, and in unmarked graves, I should say. Her and Edward Hall, her murdered husband, are buried in the same grave, and you can't find exactly where they're in the family crypt. But exploring the character, I think it was very interesting thinking about, because it's unsolved. So trying to figure out both what the sort of context of this murder was, how she may have felt about the situation before the murder, right? Her husband is having a relatively public affair, not necessarily public, but very known. And the sort of very, all the sort of pressures on her, I think, in terms of money, status, respect, religion, that she's having to deal with in this situation. But she's also incredibly unlike who I am. So it was a very interesting exploration. And I think some of what helped me solve it was think about it physically, in terms of like not solve it. I didn't solve the murder. I'm sorry. But to solve the sort of the character exploration was to think about it physically. What are the sort of, what's the situation she's been raised in, and how does she express herself? So yeah, it was very interesting. Playing cards was very helpful. The idea of her playing solitaire by herself in this big house. But I also would say it was very powerful doing that production, the original production, at the church in New Brunswick, both because the community would come and be like, oh, I knew that guy, or my uncle knew that guy in the play. And also being in that physical space that they worshipped in, all of them, like all the characters, was very interesting, very evocative, I think.
Yeah, it's a very small, it's much smaller than the center at West Park and the church building is. And you really get a sense of how there's not much privacy. This is a very small congregation, more like an English village church is what it looks like, and or a church you might find in an English village. And that, I think, really amplified that sense that Ania was talking about the embarrassment and humiliation that these characters would feel if they felt any. It was that everybody's seeing everything about them. And you're wondering about like their loss of control and their inability to. So we've focused a lot on like how the small ways in which Frances, within the limitations of the time before the murders, would try to re-exert control over the relationship, or try to like claw back some kind of
power,
some kind of dignity and power in such a situation, because we don't know exactly what happened with the murders.
Though we're all pretty much sure that she did it. I mean, I just feel.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that she. I've got my theory.
In the play, because it was unsolved, Zach, we actually staged, what was it, 8 different versions of who could have done it, or how the murders could have transpired, in this really beautiful, long movement-based piece. And it was so special. It's one of the things I miss about live theater.
Well, it's very painful for the person experiencing it, which is Charlotte.
Yes.
She's reimagining these things over and over again.
Yeah, Charlotte is the daughter of Eleanor Mills. And so that was one of the things I was going to say, is that the play, we tried to look at it through the perspective of the women that history has forgotten or wrote about but never actually interviewed, or never actually captured their side of the story. They just made assumptions about their side of the story. So we were really interested in exploring Frances Hall and exploring Eleanor Mills, the slain. And they call her, I think some newspapers call her a choir girl. She's 32 years old, married with 2 kids. You know, that infantilizing of this grown woman, and then exploring her daughter Charlotte, who was 16, kind of being the only one who was fighting for justice for her mother. And so that's what drove a lot of the play and the play's creation.
And I think also something that interestingly has carried through to the current iteration is this idea of putting people back in that space. So the original production being in the church meant that they were witnessing it as if they were members of the church at the time, in a way. And I think that idea of being kind of a witness is quite interesting, and also, and has carried through, as has the idea of making theater that's place-based or place-influenced, right? Site-specific gets used a lot, and I don't think it's a very good term often, but I think like site-influenced is quite useful for this project in every version.
Yeah. I think there's a sense, Zach, in which we're interested in, we continue to be, by making them witnesses to this historic crime that we can look at from a lot of different angles, and which people won't stop us because it's 100 years ago. Our hope is that they get used to that feeling of what it is to be complicit, and that way maybe they can call themselves on it when they're doing that. Which happens, violence is still very much a part of the world, and I think that being aware of when we're watching it, and what can be done about that. These characters chose not to do something. Like the characters who survived did very particular activities, and I think that activities that we still do today about silence, about blocking, about choosing when to come forward and when not, about what kind of violence is kind of okay. I mean, people still think of like violence against women in terms of affairs and things like this is just like people just shrug their shoulders a lot at it. So hopefully we can get people to drop some of that complacency.
It's especially important right now because while so many people are stuck at home, that can create an even more dangerous situation for people who are victims of domestic violence. And
yeah.
There's a really disturbing rise, disturbing but unfortunately unsurprising rise in domestic violence while we've all been stuck at home the last 6 months.
And people are tense, right? Like they want to be able to, they want to be able to go out, and it's hard to be stuck at home. But we got something for you.
Yeah,
that's right. And another good segue. So this production was going to be transferred to the Center at West Park, which, of course, is also located inside a church on the Upper West Side. And very sadly, that was not possible because that production was going to be in May. And so you very quickly pivoted, as you said, to a new way of telling this story. So you're using the geocaching app in a really exciting and inventive way, and audio storytelling, which you've also been doing with your podcasts. And you have a podcast about this story as well.
Yes, podcast is That's How the Story Goes.
Yeah.
So, so why don't you tell everybody about how they can engage with the story now, and how the ghost hunt works.
Right. Who wants to go? You, Ania?
I'll give it a shot. I've got a prop. So
yep. Go on, Johnny.
Yeah, we're excited about this. So one of the interesting things about the play last time was that it was in the church, and therefore emphasized that dimension. The scenes, the first half, for example, many of the scenes were set there. This gave us a chance to. We knew we wanted to make it safe, right? So we wanted to make it safe without surrendering the community aspect, and the sense that there is an audience. And we also wanted to introduce the idea, like maybe more sites, right? So we had elements of a ghost tour in mind, and we had elements of site-specific work. And we what we came up with was piggybacking on this amazing app called geocaching, which if you've got an outdoorsy relative or if you yourself are outdoorsy, you probably know what it is. And what it is it's, you've got, back in the 2000s and late 90s, people were buying all these handy-dandy GPS apps and they wanted a game to play with them, right? Global positioning systems. They used to be a military technology. Suddenly everybody got them. We didn't have smartphones yet for navigating, so what else could you do with it? And what they did was they made up a game where you hide caches all over the country. You probably, without knowing it, have one on your square block right now. There's somebody playing it. There's a hidden game device on your block. And
explain what a cache is.
And a cache is a hidden object. It could be a magnetic bolt that is hollowed out. It could be a fake brick that's inside a wall, a hole in the wall. It could be a plastic tub buried, like put underneath a log. And it's there right now around the corner from you. And what they do is you get the coordinates and then you look for the cache. And then you find the cache and you sign a log inside the cache saying that you've been there, and then you tap on your thing saying, "I found the cache. Thank you. This was my experience." And so it's like it's got a detective feel to it, right? So
and they call non-geocachers muggles.
Yeah.
They're like hide it stealthily so the muggles won't see where you put it. And
which shows when this was developed, right?
Yeah.
Like it's when the Harry Potter books are coming out. So yeah. So we've got this. It's this amazing app, and so what we did was we hid geocaches at many of the sites that have something to do with the murders, including outside Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, where Ania is, downtown Manhattan, where Charlotte Mills later worked as an adult or tried to work and had a lot of setbacks. We have one that's going up on Broadway, one in Texas where they found the replacement priest, and why was he willing to travel, 2,000 miles to get out of Texas and go to a murder church? Why did he do that? We have all these short stories all over the place.
Yeah, we have one at the church. We have one at 23 Nickel, which is the mansion where the Halls lived. We have one at the firehouse where Francis Hall's eccentric brother, Willie Stevens, used to visit and try on their helmets. And you go to these locations, you find the cache, and if you find the cache, there's a relic inside, and it's usually a prop that is related to the story itself. So this is an example of something you might find.
Example, we bring you to a key, and then the audio instructions tell you where to take that key, and you find a box of evidence that then has props inside. So, for example, our wedding cake.
Don't give it all away. We're going to use this later. Sorry. There's props inside, and artifacts and documents, and most importantly, a QR code, right? And you zap the QR code, and it invokes an audio experience
Tied directly to that site.
Yes. So
wedding cake and other things.
Yes. So it could be a scene, it could be a monologue, it could be a series of scenes, 3 to 10 minutes long, and you get a snippet of the story, and you're hearing voice actors assume these roles, assume these ghosts, these spirits from the past.
So there's a kind of a radio play quality to it, but the radio play is broken up in all of these different elements based on place. So you have a sense of location and a physical object along with the story that you're experiencing. Yeah,
and it gets quite creepy depending on where you are. And there's also a sense of, I think, detective work. Like, it really does feel like a bit like detective work trying to find the cache. Like, people often break out into a sweat when they can't immediately find it, and they start to get anxious, and then they finally locate it, and there's euphoria, and they found it. But then they find through, and like then you kind of experience it, right? And it's really potent for this particular case because no matter how many breaks they had in the case, they never really figured it out. There's like it's a bit of a Rubik's cube, incorrectly created. You cannot solve the thing. So it's a fascinating little piece.
It's also an interesting way to look at history. That like the idea of like the place boundness of history, I think, is sometimes lost when you're just reading about it. So to really tie a story and especially these historical figures to a place, I think is pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
How many total locations do we have?
Okay, so we've got 12. Right now we have 12. And seven of them are immediately accessible, assuming that you can get to Virginia. And and
the rest of them are going to be approved.
The rest are clicking into place every day. At about a rate of one per day, a new one is developed. Comes out, and that's so you go to these things and you do get an interesting sense of community with it, like the sense that other people have been there before, there's a log. You read about the other experiences that people have had, and they argue about the experience and they discuss it. We have that now with sometimes people have trouble finding them, and so they look on the previous logs or messages that other people who have been there, and they use those hints to help figure that out for each other. And then they realize if they missed something, or if they often go back and re-experience it and then comment again on that. So it's this really interesting flowing dynamic of audience.
Yeah, so it feels like community even though you might be doing it on your own.
Yeah. So that we were really pleased with that. That's kind of what we wanted, the community feeling and the disagreements about the different locations without endangering people, right? Or limiting it to people that are only in the non-vulnerable communities, right? Because you can touch the caches and use hand sanitizer and be okay with that. You won't get COVID from that. So we're...
Johnny, do you have any favorite comments that you've gotten yet on the caches?
Well, let me think. Yeah, there was a guy who found one. One is in Fredericksburg, not on the part run by the National. Fredericksburg was a battle in the Civil War, a very nasty one. And the father of Francis, whose name was also Francis, was in a unit that was at Fredericksburg, right? And so we had one of our artists create an experience for Fredericksburg in a grove down there. And the first person to found it like it was published at a strange time, like 5 a.m. And at about 6 a.m. somebody came across it, I think. That people run to these things when they find out they've come out. Not just ours, but in general, that's what the community does. The geocaching community does. And they went there, and he immediately... He experienced it. He experienced the audio play. He took a picture of one of the elements, and he commented on that it was unusually meaningful geocache, and he wanted to know if we were going to build any more in his area for that kind of experience. And so that meant something to me, because he was. I don't want to give away what is in that cache. Because it's kind of special, but
we're going to do one in Chancellorsville.
We're going to build another one in Chancellorsville, which is where Francis was captured and wounded. He was just a kid. I mean, he looks like an absolute baby in the pictures, the Civil War pictures. He was in a short amount of conflict, and he was captured, and he went back down to participate in Reconstruction, and he died of a heart attack at the age of 34, the same age that I think Eleanor Mills when she died. So it's a very sad series of caches, but meaningful and different.
That's amazing. So for the folks who are not able to go out into the world right now safely, you have created another way that they can experience this story, or for the impatient who want to be able to experience everything without having to travel.
Yeah.
And
Perhaps
so
for the people who don't want to go to Venice. Sorry.
If for some reason you don't want to go to Venice,
Yeah.
there is an alternative to experience the geocache in each location if you're not able to access it.
Yeah, that's right. We've got...
So first we have to say Jackie Mercer, Ashley Basili, they are our amazing web designers, web engineers, and they created a beautiful home hunt, basically, that you can access through Thinkery&Verse.org.
Yeah.
I will let you explain from there.
Yeah,
I just had to shout out because they're wonderful.
Yeah, they did great. That wasn't their initial commission, but they found out that we had a
Ashley's actually the prop master who makes all the caches that are all over the world now, and then Jackie's the project manager.
Who's a stage manager by trade. So both of these, it's fantastic, and they both like the rest of us, they both upskill to be able to do this.
Yeah.
And so now you can experience the locations as if you too are an incompetent 1922's policeman and go through the area. It's kind of Karen and Ashley designed a kind of pinboard, right, with the red markings tying different locations to each other, and you can go through and see some of the materials pertinent to that location, and then experience the audio play there as well, which was important because many of our folks, you have to be pretty physically able to do a lot of the caches because they're in tough to reach locations.
Yeah.
Not all of them. Some of them are handicap accessible.
So so my parents in Texas are going to experience all the New Jersey caches from the website. So yeah, you go in, there's a pinboard map of all the locations. You click on the location, it takes you into its own location page, and it has a description of why that location is relevant to the Halls-Mills murder. It has land acknowledgments as to the native peoples who originally had that land. It has pictures and archives and documents and the audio experience all on that page. So it's kind of like a case file on every single location.
That's excellent. So I know I'm excited to experience the caches that I can't visit personally online, but I am going to try to at least get to the ones in my neighborhood.
Oh, good.
So why don't we open the floor up for questions from our participants who are in the Zoom right now? If anyone, I just want to say again that we are recording and live streaming to Facebook. So if you do not want to be seen, you're welcome to just put something in the chat and I'll read it out. Or you can, if you want to speak without turning on your video, or you're welcome to turn on your video and speak your question.
Okay, while people are thinking, I'm just going to give a really quick anecdote because this was maybe my favorite moment when we were talking about initially doing this project.
Okay.
And it kind of went from, oh, let's try geocaching audio in New Jersey to Johnny being like, but if we're geocaching audio, we should include Venice. And it was just like, I think it was just amazing for that moment of like, oh yeah, like we're making a digital version anyway. We can go anywhere, which I think is the real one of the really interesting opportunities at this time. That was just my favorite. That was my favorite moment. And now we're all over.
Surprise for the first person
to get to Venice.
To experience all the caches. I was going to say.
Yeah, they have these things
physically experience them.
Yeah, they have these things called trackables where they go on a journey. And we'll give it a shot. It's actually tied to Ania's character that we had to do the Venice location because Frances Hall, after she was not initially indicted, she was indicted 4 years later, but in the initial investigation, she was not indicted for the crime, the double homicide. She was not going to be put on trial, and she and her friend Sally Peters immediately fled to Italy after that happened. They went to Naples, Genoa, I think, and then to Venice finally. And I just thought that, wow, Italy is like they were Episcopalians, right? They're Anglican, and like I feel like Italy is the place that Anglicans go after they've sinned and they want to feel better about themselves. It's like you've got Shelley going there, Byron,
Francis Hall.
yeah, Henry James, William James. They all go there to like have their moment of the soul.
Sorry, I derailed the questions. If anyone that does have questions, please. I just put the Chelsea asked for the website, so I just put it in the chat.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I have a cat now who's
He's coming to talk about me, Ania.
this just.
Have any questions?
Keep it focused on me. We're hits on Twitter.
Sorry, did someone have a question? Did you have a question, Zach?
I just wanted to invite anybody to respond. Anything that, if you may have experienced some of the piece so far, anything that has been moving for you or interesting for you or potentially confusing for you, or if there's anything else, if you have any questions about the story that you are curious about. I think we have some experts here.
I have one about the while we're waiting, one about the kind of obstacle for people doing it, right? So there's a lot of people, we are in a densely populated area, and the people who are mostly engaging with it right now are the people who already geocache, right? So what's the thing that draws, why would I make the decision to go into this new community to try to experience it this way? And I would say this is that we're in autumn here. If you remember what it was like in March, where we were really locked down and we couldn't really leave, parks were closed, things like that, and we're not in flu season yet. And if you can, stretch your legs and see what these things are like. They'll bring you to locations you haven't been to before in New York or haven't paid much attention to before. That are very boring and normal part of your world will become much more interesting and complicated. And it'll attune you to the specialness of even the most mundane looking places. It'll awaken your sense of your immediate neighborhood and place. And you're going to want that when we, unfortunately, the United States' record on this pandemic so far shows that we're going to probably get locked up again because it hasn't been managed well. So get out there and experience this place and expand your understanding of the location you're in now, and that'll reward you, and it'll pay off not just now but for a long time to come. You'll be in a more three-dimensional feeling place even when it's really dark. Also,
the murders happened in September in 1922. So experience the weather that was happening while the investigation was going on. Why not?
Indeed.
That's right. It makes it even more realistic.
It does, sadly. Yet it was right at that cusp of. It was right here. The murders took place on September 14th,
which was Monday.
Which was a
this past Monday.
This past Monday, but at the time was a Thursday, I think.
Yeah.
And then, bizarrely, no one reported that these two people were missing. Not the husband of Eleanor Mills, and not the wife of Edward Hall, or anybody else. Nobody reported them missing, though Frances Hall did call the police about 24 hours after they went missing and asked if she didn't identify herself, and she asked, have there been any casualties? And then the police said, no, who is this? And then she hung up. They only figured out, they triangulated later to figure out that this was her. But she didn't reveal herself then. And then finally, two kids, who the press initially described these kids, on the 16th at about 10 a.m. On a Saturday, two kids who were initially described as just young, innocent lovers, but in fact, it was a much darker story. They were in a lover's lane, and they came across the bodies and discovered them. And actually, of all the people who wound up in legal trouble and spent time behind in a cell because of this, they spent the most time in a cell from this case, the people who discovered the bodies.
There's a lot. There's a lot that.
This is such a rich world. It's so complex, and you've delved so deeply into it. I'm really excited to get to explore all of the nooks and crannies of the complexity of this story and the psychology of the characters that you've so skillfully explored.
Oh, and the voice actors were so the artists did such a great job on this. So we didn't direct each of these locations ourselves. We rather sort of made a place where there were location creators, and so artists got to explore elements of that aspect and
craft the experience.
We had editorial control, but there were elements in which they were new to and got to learn or try for the first time. And then the voice actors themselves, because they only had their voices to use, I think that really we heard some really new dimensions from our artists. I was very impressed with some of the work that they did. There's so many of them, I don't want to name names, but it was like you found places where they reached new emotional moments and had new revelations about what different scenes meant to their characters. We were also able to focus in on different characters with a little bit more patience than we did in the stage play when it was like a freight train. So you had to spin through and be very quick on your wits, and the performances were very good. But here we give the artists time to breathe through their scenes. So very exciting to hear them develop and grow like that. And know that we also can keep adding to the story. This is really, we're excited.
Yeah, I can't wait to see where it goes.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll have to go to Venice to find the last geocache. So I think that we're about at the end of our hour today.
Okay.
So
can I say one thing, Zach, about this is just for anybody who loves geocaching or loves Hall-Mills or loves us. We do have a donation page up through the center at West Park, and thank you, Zach, for creating that for us.
Yeah.
And so I do want to say this is all self-funded through Thinkery&Verse. And we're not charging anything. It's a free experience, and we want it to stay that way, and it will stay that way. But if anybody does want to donate to the project to help pay the artists and the upkeep of these geocache experiences, you can donate at that site. It's tax deductible, I believe, those donations. And there's a special button that you can push if you want to sponsor a location. So you can literally sponsor the Church of St. John the Evangelist, and that'll be your location. And that's for $250. And we're happy to promote you, your business. You can do it in memory of somebody, in honor of somebody. So yeah, be in touch with us if that's something you're interested in. Thank you.
thank you for sharing that, Karen. Yes, so please go to center@westpark.org, center@westpark.org, if you want to make a donation to Thinkery&Verse, resident artists at the Center at West Park this fall. And thank you, Ania. And thank you all so much for being here with me this afternoon. This was really great. I'm so thrilled to really get a deeper sense of your work and how you constructed this really compelling world that audiences can experience in a unique and a really innovative way in this time when artists are having to go really far outside the box. And you've actually found a way to put things in the box and hide it for people to find.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Ania.
Thank
you, Karen.
And thank you, everybody, for being here, for watching, for joining us on the Zoom and on Facebook. All right. Have a good afternoon, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.